All right, well, let's get started. We don't want to waste too much time here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 ASU Digital Trust Summit, coordinated by the ASU University Technology Office. My name is Brianna, and I'm your Zoom host. I am an ASU student and an intern for the University Technology Office. We will be monitoring the chat and be here for technical support during the session. Before we get started, we have a few reminders and announcements. We'd like to remind you that the chat feature is turned on and ready for you to submit your questions. The session is beginning to record for inclusion. If you would not like to be recorded, please feel free to turn off your cameras at this time. Remember to stay connected and use our Digital Trust Summit on LinkedIn. Our hashtags are available on the agenda page. You can also continue the conversation in our Slack channel, #DigitalTrustLobby. And with that, we're going to start recording. We'd like to introduce you to our two speakers here, Termeh and Danielle, who will be presenting. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to use the chat.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I would love to actually maybe take a moment, and I see we have Rasmus, we have Stephanie, and we know Nayan. I would love to kind of know what organization you guys are with and, what interests you in this session. So, sorry, I just saw this chat window. Go ahead.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Rasmus. I'm with ASU, and I only have 15 minutes, so I joined one that sounded cool. So that's why I'm here.
I love it. I love it. Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. I'm actually with the CNC team, so super excited to be here to kind of cover the event and learn more. This one's really intrigued me, so pleased to meet you both.
Pleasure. And Nayan, do you want to just do a quick intro?
Yeah, this is Muzammil Hussain Nayan. I am working as a digital marketing fellow at Leonardo. I am here to learn more about the relationship between digital trust, agency, and how these things work. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, awesome to have you guys here. So why don't we go ahead and get started? What we want to talk to you about today is agency and trust, and in a digital space, but we want to encourage you to look at it from a slightly different perspective than probably everybody else is doing in the next these days as everyone's talking about it. And so what we want to do is we want to start with kind of grounding our discussion in some definitions. So we want to start with the giver and the guarantor. So in a digital trust model, a giver is you and me, and a guarantor is like Uber or Facebook or any institution or ASU. So any institution that basically is building that relationship with the individual. And there are cybersecurity firms, there's laws, there's regulations, there's infrastructure providers, but they all kind of fall into the guarantor ecosystem. So keep this in mind as we kind of go forward and talk about the relationship. Harvard Business Review published this article a few years back based on research done at Tufts, which identified 4 dimensions of digital trust. So those dimensions include behavior, which is how do users respond to the friction that the digital experience has. Friction such as, oh, I have to wait for a download, or you want me to add in a security code. Attitudes. Attitudes are things like, how do they feel about the environment? Do they feel valued? Do they think that you actually are going to protect and value their interactions? And there's a couple of surveys out there that tracks this. One of them is Edelman's Trust Barometer, and the other one is the World Values Survey. Then we talk about the environment, the digital environment. So the guarantor mechanisms for building trust. So these are things like privacy, online security, accountability. And then there's experience, which is pretty self-explanatory, except that it's really focused on how much the security mechanisms that are put in create friction in the experience. And in this article, they talk about intelligent friction, which is balancing the need to build in certain mechanisms and how much it impacts user experience. When I think about this, there's a huge component that's missing in this model. And what's missing in this model is agency. And for those of you, since both of you are at SAU, you may already be familiar with Martin's model of learner agency, in which it talks about the ability for someone to control their environment and take action to benefit themselves. We use a very similar model in the digital world. So it is the ability of someone to be able to control their interactions and their online identity, whether they initiate action or not, to what extent they can use the tools for their own needs versus the needs that you think they may need. And so what becomes really interesting is that most entities look at digital trust from the point of view of the guarantor or the provider. And they forget about the fact that the more systems and the more components you build into your system, the more you're restricting agency, and that can have some negative impacts. So remember the Edelman barometer that I mentioned? Well, trust in technology is at a 21-year low. And 81% of adults, according to Pew, feel that they have little or no control over the information that companies collect about them. So it's very difficult to create an engaged community and to create trust if the end user doesn't really feel like you're giving them the value or valuing the interaction that you're having with them. And so one of the questions that comes up, and I'm going to pause and I want to ask a question really quickly, is, do you guys think technology is neutral? And we have a poll, we don't have to do a poll. Well, we can do the poll. Okay. So I want you to consider, the majority said that technology is not neutral. And And so I want us to consider the ways in which it is not neutral. So I want to start with, some of you may be familiar with Dr. Kathy O'Neill. She is, I think she calls herself Math Babe. So she's like this amazing, very, very, very just phenomenal mathematician. And, you know, one of the things that she talks about is the level of bias and subjectivity that goes into building algorithms. And so she talks about how basically there are subjective choices that people are making, and they're embedding their opinions into what later other people call math. And that's a real problem because there's no neutrality in what is being done. About, I think it was 2-3 years ago, or maybe 4 years ago, MIT Media Lab researcher Joy Buolamwini started this just amazing movement based on the fact that she realized that when she joined MIT and she was going into buildings where the security was looking at her face, the facial recognition either didn't recognize that she was there or thought that she was a man. And this made her think, why is this happening? And she did a ton of research. And one of the things that she did is she actually took a white mask and she put the white mask on her face, and then went in front of the facial recognition software, and then there was a recognition that there is a face. And so this started, and she has found Algorithm Justice League, which sounds very superhero-y, but she actually is a huge advocate for saying that, you know, the second you start analyzing different components, if you don't have enough diversity that went into building those components, then you're not going to have, the outcome is not going to be representative of everyone that needs to interact with it. And so as we go about building our systems, you know, we need to keep in mind that we're constantly trying to mitigate these issues. So for example, when we were building a worldwide community, we at National Geographic, we found that even though we wanted to know people for the interactivity component, that a lot of those individuals lived in countries where they couldn't actually state their opinion freely. So that lack of freedom of expression inhibited their just dealings in online environments. They didn't want to be known. And so if we wanted to have an engaged community, we needed to give them that agency. Or for example, when we were building one of the earliest communities on AOL and building out terms of service, you were bringing together people with very different cultural contexts. In Germany, you cannot discuss Nazism. That is against the law. And so you have to kind of be able to create that agency if you want to create, true engagement. And that brings us to this concept of interpretive flexibility, which says there are different, each group's definition of what is functional on a device is going to differ from another. And that ideally what happens is that these different needs push against each other until we develop a system that is representative. But if you don't have the right people engaged in the discussion from the very beginning, you're not going to be able to build something that is representative at any level. So one of the things that I ask everyone to do when they're thinking about building new systems is the who, right? So most people say, of course, we think about this, but no, you have to think about are we building this for? Who is, defines the need for what is here and what's in the system? Who develops the system? Who designs the interactions for the designers? What do they take into account? Who tests it to make sure that it's working as designed? Who markets it? Who deploys it, and who uses it? So if you are building a new system or a new community and you look around the table and you don't have representation at every single touch point, at every single step, chances are that you're not thinking in that broader perspective and that you're not building, there are going to be these gaps in the audience. And that becomes important again, because it prevents them from being able to interact and trust the environment. So going back to the, I had talked about the 4 dimensions. And, I want to touch again on the fact that there is a guarantor need versus a giver agency. So those are the two poles that are pulling and pushing against each other. And you really need to think about that as you're designing your community. Consumption preferences. This is especially true in learning environments where everybody has such different needs for learning and consuming content, but I would argue every single time we put content out there, we're educating. And so keeping that in mind and the way that people like to interact with information becomes really important. Then I would like to talk about the spectrum of anonymity, which is something I define as, there is a big space between I need to know everything about you and I need to know nothing about you. There's a spectrum, and this is a great opportunity to give agency back to your community by giving them options that allow them to control the level of information that you have about them. And then last, I want to talk about internationalization, localization, and personalization. Think about internationalization as a platform approach that allows for display of different topographies and languages and different ways of interacting. Think of localization as your approach to providing cultural context for the user that come from different cultures. And by that, I don't necessarily mean in a global sense, but I mean every community has their own cultural context. And if that community and their engagement is important to you, you need to take that into consideration. And then lastly is personalization. And that's because within any framework, each of us are different and will like to engage in a slightly different way. And the more you let them do that, the better it is. So the 3 points: sharing agency builds trust, trusted systems lead to engaged communities, and then engaged communities are co-created. So we're here as Leonardo, and the reason we want to share our experience with you, at first you might be like, Leonardo, what does that have to do with what I do? Well, it's actually it's a community that's been around for a long time. So Leonardo has been around for over 5 decades. We're 134 cities globally. We have published more than 10,000 authors. And what's interesting is we deal with artists, we deal with scientists, we deal with technologists. So we're dealing with populations that have different languages, that come from different cultural contexts, that are highly individualistic. We're dealing with individuals, some are very much linear thinkers, and some are very nonlinear thinkers. So creating a community and a community engagement that allows for collaboration and brings everyone together is a huge feat and something that Leonardo has managed to actually do. And so now I'm going to hand off to Danielle, and she's going to talk to you about 3 specific examples of how we've done that in Lumen Prize, in Cryptech Incubator, and in Laser Network. Danielle?
Thank you, Termeh. I think that was an incredible framing of how we can think about community, especially looking at the way that most of us are engaging with community in a digital space. Right now. I'm going to give you 1 second to get my presentation up. Okay, do you all see, I just lost it. Hold on a second. Do you all see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So we actually address community in a few different ways, and I'm going to share one of our strongest community centered programs with you. This is the International Laser Network, the programs that we have that are in over 45 cities internationally and growing. And the gist of this is that it is a decentralized network. This was a community that actually came to us and has grown organically without really, in some ways, we weren't even ready to bring it in until it started to come in and develop on its own and grow on its own. And as people realize that they can be connected to an idea, a thought, a way of thinking collectively all around the world while still having those cultural values, that is how we actually grew this laser network. And I'll share some of the partnerships and institutions that we are part of. For the most part, these are based at universities, at academic centers worldwide, but also at labs. We have some that are produced in cafes or artist studios, while others are in larger centers and museums worldwide and in multiple languages. And what connects everyone together is that the leadership, those who are creating and curating these laser moments locally, are able to connect together with us on a regular basis with a lot of support. So you can think of it in some ways sort of like if TED Talks was a little bit more rogue and organic. And I think the reason why it's been so successful is because of that opportunity for the local institutions and organizations to have their own agency, to have their own relationships and build a community. This is really about the idea of osmosis, like bringing together those from the scientific community, engineers, botanists, chemists, physicists, mathematicians, and those in the humanities and arts, philosophers, poets, performers, new media artists, and listening to each other's work, finding those commonalities, finding those common threads, and then those collaborations happen organically over that within dialogue and discussion. And we've done experiments around this community and those different formats, and we've sort of got an idea of how this really helps grow and build in a way that people feel like they're also connected to this laser network worldwide. So you can go to any of these 45 plus cities internationally and attend one of these events, whether they are based in a more academic forum or they're based in more of a community conversation, they all have the common theme of bringing together multiple disciplines in the same room with the same dialogue. Now I'm going to share a little bit about another way that we've addressed community in a very different approach. Last year, we partnered with a global new media prize called the Lumen Prize, who puts out an about 11 prize winners for the best new media artwork in the world. Basically, they have thousands of people submit, and then they get to check it out. So what we decided to do, since of course it's the pandemic, we created an online gallery space for that, for the artwork to be exhibited and shown. But really, this was a lot about how the user experience of understanding how digital art that was born in a native form can be experienced. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of this. This was this design was developed by two new media architects. One's name is DC Spenceley, and the other is Gustavo Rincon, who actually really thought quite a bit about how will the community, how will a user really be able to experience this? And there was a lot of redundancy about this because, again, we're working into this space that's not quite ready for VR, but still takes on some of those gaming features where you can go into an exhibition through a portal, or you can actually go in to see the artwork through a map. And this thought about this experience and how we can actually understand artworks in this immersive way became really an important part of how we actually built community. And you could add your information, or you can actually observe anonymously, and you can really personalize this experience or come in with others, as there is the ability to have avatars from within. This, by the way, is still live. So if you do want to come in and see any of this work, a lot of this work are artists from all over the globe. Liliana Farber is based in Uruguay, and her work is looking at mapping around islands in around South America that are left out or misidentified by Google Maps. And so you can actually get in close and see this experience. And this really was focused on how will the user actually understand and approach the exhibition. And you can always escape and then go to any of these other ones and chat with someone in the space and learn from them and engage in that particular moment. So I'm going to come back into this presentation here and wrap up with this slide. This is another program that we've designed within Leonardo, and this is really done with the inception of it as the for, with, and by. It's called the Cryptek Incubator, and how we operate is on a full cycle creative engine with impact at the center, and exhibitions, research, design, presentation, community, convening, all centered around it, and looking or you're thinking about technology and realize that all technology is rooted in disability, addressing a need, a problem, an interface, an interaction from somebody in the who has a disability. And in the Cryptek Incubator, this particular community of disabled new media artists have been hacking their own technology forever, for quite some time. And this is really about designing the evaluation, designing the program, designing artists in residencies, having the support, all focused around the intersectional communities of those who identify as disabled and those who identify as another underrepresented artist space. And so we are now in the planning phase where we're bringing in stakeholders to help the evaluation and the proposals. And then next year we will have the artists in residence that will come in to 4 different residency centers and partnerships all over the state of California, from Irvine up to San Francisco. and they will be able to have the resources, the funding, the support needed to really realize their ideas, and those will then culminate in a website, documentation, and also a book or a journal, one of our Leonardo journals, and an exhibition that will likely be at the ASU Herald Examiner building in Los Angeles. So this is another way that we've actually built another aspect of community, really focusing on primarily the agency and the understanding of how it's developed, really centered around that space. And I'm going to stop there because I know we have to have some time for questions, but that gives you an overview of our community areas.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, both to Termeh and Danielle, for such incredible presentations and really sharing with us what it means to have this connection with Leonardo and ASU. So again, I appreciate you sharing so much. It's really exciting to see, virtually how we can still stay connected. That's awesome. I would like to open it up for Q&A if anybody has any questions.
I'll also mention that ASU Leonardo has several of these programs embedded in the university and the university culture. For one, there is a laser city and there's a laser site in Tempe, Arizona. Pamela Winfrey, who's an amazing art and science cultural producer, really has curated an incredible laser ASU series that really encourage you all to participate and engage with. In addition to that, the Cryptek Incubator, part of it will be embedded within ASU. There will be a course, most likely at the end of the residency or the end of the period, which is around 2023, that will focus on new media art and disability. And that will be something that you can also really connect and engage with. So this is something that's really part of the culture at ASU.
Very unique work and incredibly impressive how the integration with students. I mean, I can't imagine the possibilities, especially being able to virtually show that off. It's really neat.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely open and interested for anyone who's interested in connecting and getting involved to reach out to us, and we're very welcoming to anyone from the community.
So I would love, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was curious. I would love to know kind of, how you each define the community, and if there are things in here and online communities that you found surprising or unexpected.
In terms of, are you asking me?
No, I'm asking
other people. How is it different community? I always find people have very different definitions of community, actually.
It's interesting because I took a class with ASU kind of going over that specifically, and we used to do these workshops in the beginning of class that would post up certain words like that. So community was one of them, and it is interesting to see the different definitions of what that looks like to people. Sometimes it could be, familiar with family, friends, different demographics. Sometimes it's language, sometimes it's physically, mentally, emotionally, how they connect. So it is very interesting to see the different perspectives there. And I love that you guys use and utilize the connection of values and being able to see, how instead of exclusion, how you can include and provide voices for all. I think that's really, really incredible.
Thank you. I mean, I think that there's so many different ways that we define this and approach it, from just like the mere following of something that's on social media, from an Instagram post to a tweet, to really having an art experience. And I think last year, having most of the galleries close, being able to share an art experience that's as was created in the Lumen exhibition with Leonardo is one example of how you can still be with somebody with your avatar. And that's not new. I mean, this is Second Life and Sims have been doing this type of work for or quite some time, but I think that the accessibility part of it is really critical. I think accessibility in how you frame some of that digital trust is also part of it, right? Can you actually come into something without having to sign up? Can you actually just, and that was actually one of the major decisions on using the platform we used for the exhibition, was that you did not have to have a VR headset. You did not have to sign up to attend it. You did not have to really even know how to navigate it. And that was part of how people can feel like they don't have to be giving away information to receive something, right? So.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think you hit on something that we didn't touch on that I think is important, which is how, when we make decisions about how we create environments, keep in mind that not everybody has access to the latest and greatest. And so what ends up happening in terms of the technical architecture, a lot of times, whether it's in the, a tech space or whether it's any other space, it is so geared towards, the shiny and new. And I think if anything, the pandemic, taught us is like, hey, can we get online? Forget whether I can have a VR experience learning, but can I even get online? And so, I think as those of you who have a hand in either creating communities or creating, and the idea of creating architecture or systems that exclude, whether intentionally or non-intentionally, is also nothing new. We've been at this game of inclusion for a long time, and it's just, I think, something that we need to keep in mind at all times and every step. And that's where going back to your audience and their cultural context becomes really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've learned quite a bit, especially with working with the Cryptech Incubator on in areas around digital access and technology, right? So it's actually, today it's far easier. I mean, in this particular workshop, this webinar, we're able to use live transcript that's using AI to make that happen. I mean, that's pretty evolved from where we were before, but there's also issues around things like screen readers, and there are understanding of actually how we share information. We've actually changed our entire way we share things on social media and on our website to really understand those access needs, because we realized that before that we were not considering that community and how we shared out with the world. And so that became really central to how we think about things. And we see this also with how you make people comfortable coming in to one of these conferences or sessions. And while we didn't go through the formalities in this one, I think that's been really repeated quite a bit. And so everything is evolving, and people are going to feel where they feel the most connected to. But the more that we can enable and support that access, I think that's going to be really help create a more diverse and rich dialogue, and something to think towards.
Danielle, I'd love to hear more about the kinds of things that you intentionally did differently as you thought about that community.
Yeah, so one example, this is very basic stuff, but we on our newsletter, our monthly newsletter, we would always have the social media sent automatically. And a lot of people use things like Hootsuite and other third-party aggregators to put that out, but it didn't allow for alt text. And that became really important. Like, how do we actually add the image descriptions in alt text? And especially on social media, we added in image descriptions on everything that were not really visible with the way the screen reader was looking towards that. That became pretty important. Also, how we accepted our applications. We were allowing for the applications to have people to either submit if they couldn't use the screen. If they couldn't use the screen, they could actually call a phone number, and they could leave the application on the phone number, or they could upload an audio file or a video file. Like, there are ways that some people cannot use the keyboard to write something up. So then how do you actually then enable that through this process?